Hi, I'm Taylor Carpenter, and this is Denver Williams. We're going to give you an intro to the CNCF's Cross-Cloud CI project. So the Cross-Cloud CI tests different versions of Kubernetes and projects which can run on those clusters across multiple cloud providers. Talk a little bit about the history of the project, why it's around, what it does, give an overview of the different pieces, and then some lessons learned and where we're trying to go. At the end, we'd like to have a Q&A and get some feedback. So the idea for this project came late 2015, early 2016, about testing compatibility of different versions of Kubernetes on cloud providers, along with the applications on what they're going to use as far as features and everything else. And this was before Kubernetes Working Group and other projects like Cluster API, getting cloud providers directly involved with the testing. There's no GA version of kubeadm, and many other projects that are trying to help with this. It's a complement to those at this point, but this is talking about where it was before. So what is it? So this is a CNCF project, and we've been hearing a lot about all the growth. So this system is composed with a CI system underneath, which there's a lot out there, and then a status repository with an API for both sending information and pulling it, and then a dashboard for showing the different status results. The CI system has a build pipeline that can both build from source and pull artifacts externally. And then we have the multi-cloud provisioner, which is called cross-cloud, as well as cross-project, which deploys projects. And then you can run end-to-end test. The original goal was to target all the CNCF projects and eventually get to those. It keeps growing, of course, as well as add other projects. ONAP would be one, a Linux Foundation project. And then target different cloud providers, including bare metal, support hybrid clouds. And the inception of the project started February 2017 as far as implementation. This was a focus on the CI platform underneath, and that kind of continued. September of 2017, we had the green light on the design for the dashboard and started implementing that. And in January, we had the status repository as well as the first version of the dashboard. We continued to work on that and add new projects and new cloud providers like OpenStack. We also added ONAP, which was the first non-CNCF as well as the first project that had its own CI system where we integrated with. They have a Jenkins server creating all the build artifacts. So we pull those in and deploy from there rather than building from source. Continue to add more projects, and in October we've had 8 cloud providers that we support for provisioning and 6 CNCF/non that are in production. And by in production, I'm talking about on CNCF's dashboard. So CNCF CI is the implementation and an instance of this project that runs all the stages. The testing is refreshed at 3 a.m. Eastern every day, and it goes through all these stages. So here's what it looks like at a glance. This is on a good day where everything's green. Let's go through looking at the good day for a moment. So we have our builds here. This is a status of all the projects that we're actively testing, including Kubernetes. Right now we are focused on the dashboard for the latest stable release that we're supporting, as well as the latest commit on the head of master. And then we take those build artifacts, specifically Kubernetes, and provision the different cloud providers. So we end up with 2 clusters for each, the master and release, across all 8 providers. And then once we have those clusters up, we can deploy the projects. And those go up, and we can run whatever test. Ideally, those are integration tests, is a goal for us. So sometimes they fail, though, right? Sometimes they fail. So this is a snapshot from yesterday of the dashboard. It's a little bit smaller because my res isn't as large as those other ones. But you can see here we have some failed builds on the, some failed builds like for Prometheus, some of the provisioning of Kubernetes failed for different providers. We skipped some deploys because of failures and so on. And before we get more into the status, we're going to take a look at some of the technology behind. I'm going to hand it over to Denver for that.
Hey, so I'm Denver, and I've had a pretty large background in CI/CD. And for this project, one of the big hurdles we had to deal with is, well, GitLab's great for a single project when there's a single commit, but how are we going to deal with, now there's 7 projects on the dashboard, we need to trigger them, start them, watch the status, and then report the results concurrently. So we created a trigger client that basically will go, based on this configuration, here's a small example of what we've got here. It's for Envoy, and then it's pretty abstract. We can set where the images are. So on the dashboard, we've got the logo of the project. You can set the URL for that, and then the project name, and then what version are we testing? 1.7.1, and also we want to track the master release of the project. So what branch should we use for that? And then once we've got that set, also there's the clouds. What cloud providers do we want this project to be run against? So we have this configuration here, and this lets us turn which cloud providers on. So here we've got all the cloud providers on the dashboard turned on except for GKE. And once that's set, here's a look at the actual trigger client running. We set it for the prod environment, and how we run this is we just have this as a cron at the moment every 24 hours with the configuration, and it runs, pulls the latest release it's tracking, and then runs the jobs. So testing system overview, how are we doing this? Well, first of all, we've got a build pipeline. So that runs, and when that runs, it'll go through all the projects that have been enabled, Kubernetes, Prometheus, and so on. And it will trigger a build and wait for the builds to finish, then store the artifacts in GitLab. And then the next stage is it'll make sure the cloud providers, the Kubernetes clusters in this case are up and available. And then once that stage is finished, it'll run app deployments and actually deploy the enable project to those clusters and then run checks to go, well, is this project actually functioning? And here's a short overview of those stages. Here we can see build, package, and then it sends a response to the dashboard and goes, okay, it succeeded. And then the cloud provisioning, which goes through collecting the Kubernetes artifacts, then running a provision for Kubernetes of the release specified, and then providing that succeeds, sending a response to the dashboard saying it worked, and then also storing the cluster access artifacts so we can actually have the apps deploy there. And that's where this next stage comes in, where it collects the artifacts for all the projects built, then uses Helm to deploy that app, and Helm lets us basically template in the exact version we want to use, so a Docker tagged with the hash based on the actual release we built, and then an end-to-end test, and then we can update the dashboard and go, it succeeded. So a technology overview of all the technologies we use to pull this off. For the CI/CD platform, for actually running all these jobs, we use GitLab. So this allows us to specify how to build this project in a YAML file. And then how we provision our clusters. So for this, we used a combination of Terraform. And the reason we chose Terraform instead of going directly with cloud APIs is because all the work was mainly done for us. We could do something pretty abstract and not have to redo it for 6 providers, because if we had to maintain that directly, that'd be a full-time job. We'd never be able to keep up with 20 projects on the dashboard. And then as for app deployments, we've been leveraging Helm because most of the time there's public Helm charts, and that means that's less for us to maintain, and they're doing CI checks upstream for that, so that saves us a lot of work there too, and it's pretty trustworthy. And then end-to-end tests, we're also using Helm because it's just easy access to the cluster. It makes it really easy to just deploy a Helm chart that goes, oh, run the end-to-end test, and then publish the results. So as for dashboard overview, the CNCF.CI, the front end is Vue.js, and the status repository, which is actually collecting all the data from the GitLab API and storing it, is Elixir and Erlang. And then automated builds is Git. We're watching Git for push results and doing it based on time so we can run on a schedule. So that's it for the technology overview. I'm going to pass back over to Taylor to go over lessons learned.
Thanks, Denver. So lessons learned over the last nearly 2 years. Well, we probably would have started with the dashboard, designing that, and then looking at what is the audience that we want to focus on. Part of the feedback on that, if we say, what is this? What do you care about? Some people care about the clouds, the provisioning. And some people are saying, I care about the projects and how they are working on Kubernetes. Other people want to know, does Prometheus work well with Core DNS? So that integration. And trying to show that all of that information on one dashboard is difficult, and you can have a lot of other things that come from there. So that would tie in with the audience, and then also simplifying the communication. This comes on to that next point there, so graceful failures in the web UI. So when you have someone that maybe cares about the cloud providers, then you have a focus on how are you going to look into the errors and the results there. And that would drive how we want to bring them up from the underlying system, whether it's maybe a problem in GitLab, a problem accessing the provider, maybe Kubernetes failed provisioning. And then likewise with projects where you have failures in grabbing the kube config that you created earlier that we spoke about. And that sort of thing would probably drive. We have lots of thoughts on where we want to go, but I think the decisions would have been made earlier driving those. Likewise, being tightly coupled to the existing CI system, so that would be in with GitLab is what I'm talking about there. So using that pushed us forward very quickly with a lot of the other parts, but then it got us tied into both some of the way that GitLab thinks about how CI and CD should work, as well as different paths even within GitLab on how you should get information out of it. So the pipelines that they provide don't match exactly with maybe other systems, but they're close. But you have a mixture of what I'm showing here with what are we testing in CI versus what is the software we used to build tools. And that gets mixed up enough that it becomes difficult to see maybe where the issues are. GitLab supports event hooks, and so looking at stuff like that and thinking more at that top down from the dashboard and thinking pulling events, we may have been able to say, we want to pull events from Jenkins and Circle CI and GitLab. We're going to focus on GitLab first because we have control and we want source builds, but we're going to make sure and use their event hooks from the start. And that ties in with supporting existing projects. So the integration when we added ONAP would have been something we would have thought of and already been planning for. So that'd be one of the things. And then designing everything so that folks can contribute. So Core DNS was probably one of the first projects that really wanted to be involved with trying to help maintain the integration test and how things were built, and a lot of other projects have stepped up since then. We've had quite a bit of help from cloud providers since maybe the fourth or fifth one. Like we've continued. OpenStack was the first, a lot of help on that. Not as much on the projects, but then ongoing maintenance of the cloud for the cloud provider side is not as easy when everything is tied tightly into the GitLab system. And that would tie into having composable portions from the start, and I will say reproducible. The different pieces like cross-cloud, the multi-cloud provisioner, it can be used by itself, and in fact it is, by different projects. But when you want to look at the full implementation with the dashboard, you need GitLab right now. And that takes a lot of effort to build up. So thinking reproducible from the start, which we've done in other projects, would have helped a lot for people that want to run all or part of it, and then getting those projects involved so that we can have spread contributions and more feedback directly. So what's next? So we've been focused on a lot of collaboration with different community. There's different CI efforts across the board in CNCF. We're going to continue on that. And oh, I went too far. There's projects that are using various components, like Network Service Mesh had been using cross-cloud for provisioning Kubernetes clusters for some of their CI. We would like those components to be able to be used independently and continue to grow that. Adding more projects. So one of the big focus for us going forward is increasing focus on the projects themselves, including getting to more integration test, and then cross-project compatibility, which was one of the original goals. And for that, you have to think about stuff like, what are use cases? What are real-world use cases? When someone's going to take Jaeger and FluentD and all of these and build something out, and they say, and we also need a Postgres database. So what do we need to create those real-world use cases? That means collaborating with the projects and end users that are using them, and we'd like to show that. So that'll tie in with new screens that we're going to be working towards to show these different things, maybe splitting out the provisioning on the clouds and the status on that from the projects so that we have the audience focus. Integrating with more platforms, so adding direct support to maybe show the status repository pulling from Circle CI if, say, a project has that, and then going right to the status, the dashboard. Automating more of the release and updates. We've had early screens where it would have, say, yellow tags, and you could see the last working release. So we want to get all that in as we move forward. We have some more events coming up. There's a CI Working Group that's monthly, and different projects, including this one, are talked about on there. So I encourage folks that care about CI to join. And if you'd like to collaborate, there's a CI Working Group meeting. There's also I don't know if it's on here, maybe the next. There's a Slack. We're really soliciting feedback right now because we're planning on doing the next version of the dashboard and a lot of the different pieces start of this year. And if you're interested, whether you've been seeing issues and you've used it, where you would like to use it, then create an issue on the GitHub, please, for an enhancement or feedback. You can connect with us on Twitter, GitHub, and again, Slack. The Cloud Native Slack, there's a CNCF CI group. So with that, let's go to a Q&A.
You mentioned OpenCI. What is that? Is that a real project or just a set of standards?
So the question was, yeah, absolutely. So do you mind walking around? So the question was, what is OpenCI? Is that a project or what is that? So OpenCI is a project or a collaborative effort with a lot of people in the community. It happened, there's a face-to-face meeting I think about a year ago now. And there's a mailing list and a wiki and several things going up, including a white paper that's being built. And yeah.
Are there any people like GitLab or Circle CI, for example?
Right at the bottom.
Is there any contributions from Circle CI or Travis or GitLab or sort of well-known sort of CI providers?
Are you referring to
OpenCI?
To the OpenCI? Okay, so we've had a lot of interactions in cross-cloud with GitLab. For OpenCI, I think there's a lot of different interests in community. So Melvin and Fatih back here, there's several people that can talk that are helping drive this. Watson's been working some with the white paper. But maybe I'm happy for them to answer as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Either way. Fatih? Yeah, go ahead, Fatih.
Yeah, as Tyler mentioned, like we had this workshop around April during Open Networking Summit with 8 different communities, like CNCF, Linux Foundation, OpenStack, OpenMP, Open Daylight, Ansible, ONUP, FIDO. So we start this conversation there, and since April we reached out to Jenkins community. GitLab kind of joined. We have 2 people contributing in white paper. We reached out to Spinnaker community. They are working with continuous delivery. And Travis, we haven't done that yet. So, yeah, currently there are 10 communities participating in it.
Anyone else?
Quick question, just by curiosity. Do you guys experience some kind of flakiness on the test, either by the cloud provider, the test itself, or anything, networks, interactions, or stuff like that?
Was that testing for Kubernetes, or what the?
Any kind. I mean, if you're testing Kubernetes on GKA, if you get any issue installing it, or you're testing on any other cloud, whether it's down, or Terraform is doing its job correctly, or you're testing FluentD and you're, I don't know,
Okay.
it could be anything.
So we've seen a lot of different things, and a lot of the original testing with Kubernetes has been on VMs, so versus the actual Kubernetes service providers, or a service by a cloud provider. And we've seen failures from the API. We've seen failures, what I would call infrastructure within the cloud, where you're accessing or trying to request too many resources at once and run into race conditions. So we said we can't create the stable release and the head release at the same time. We need to wait for one to complete, and had to deal with stuff like that, as well as Terraform provider issues. Yeah, so it's kind of been across the board. Probably the more interesting ones would be when they get into what features may not work, and that's harder without having really solid integration test. We did see some stuff with the ONAP project with regard to storage and what's available. So there was a lot of, I would say, assumptions on the cluster that was being tested. So we had to make adjustments to say, how's it going to work?
Thanks.
I have a question about this. You have all these projects like CNCF projects, and you have ONAP there. Who decides the criteria to mark something green or red? Is it? I hope you are getting help from the communities, but in our case, we weren't able to get any input, and we had to do something, and then in the end, they weren't happy. So it's like how it works for you.
That seems to be usually the way it goes. You do something and then people complain, and then you try to adjust based on that. We solicit a lot of feedback, and you get a lot more once someone sees something they don't like. Ideally, we're trying to eliminate false positives, and then the focus would be integration test. That actually, on the Kubernetes side's a little easier because you could run the conformance test. You can also say, we really want to turn on these service flags that would be specific to vendors if you want. When you get projects deploying, though, you really need someone that knows the project well to talk about the integration test. And then if you're going to use multiple projects, you can make stuff up, but what you want is something end users are going to have.
Hey there, I was just wondering if you'd given any thought to on-premises Kubernetes deployments, to say something done through RKE or something like that, where you'd want to have all the same tests, test all the same CNCF projects, and kind of make that as part of, for whatever reason you're a big institution, you can't operate in the cloud, you could still have a lot of value on this work that you guys have been doing. Have you given any thought to those kinds of use cases?
Definitely. So we've talked with some folks about that, and there's been a desire with even some of the projects. Like ONAP consists of a lot of projects underneath, and what we're showing on the CNCF CI is just a couple of them. And to put all of them wouldn't really make sense to have one green button, and then it fails probably a lot if you have 20 to 80 projects that you might be testing. So that one could probably use one dashboard with a lot. And that would be an example of that project, but also for a company that wants to do it. So the configuration-driven stuff that Denver was showing, a company could come in and decide what they want to test and put it in there, and that would be what's going to show on the dashboard. And then rather than multiple cloud providers, it would be more of, here's our on-premise. Maybe it's on-premise for different colos or something, but you could definitely do that.
So that's something that's like planned for a future version, or is that something you have today?
I would say the software is there now. If someone wanted to use it, like you could use cross-cloud, you could use the cross-project in different pieces, the dashboard itself and the status repository. It would be how you're going to implement that. So Network Service Mesh and some other groups that have used the provisioner for Kubernetes, they've taken that and used it directly. Like Network Service Mesh is using it, I think in Travis, it might have been Circle CI. But
Yeah, I can't remember what would be using.
so essentially you'd either need to build out the whole thing, and that's GitLab right now, which we're looking, how do we make that easier? Or you would take those components, what you want, including the dashboard if you want, and use that directly. But
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Yeah, it is working only with GitLab for now. The platform, or can be working for us with other CI.
So, so the It was originally implemented in GitLab and pretty tightly coupled. So by the time that the dashboard came out, there was a second iteration of the CI system that separated a lot of the pieces, so the provisioner at that point could be taken and used other places. So the parts themselves could be used outside, but if you want to use the whole, everything as a whole, it is on GitLab.
Okay.
You're essentially saying, what are we going to run? So each of those stages in the pipeline. So we say, we want to be able to do a build. So if you already had a build system with artifacts, so you're already building the binaries that you want to use, then you could theoretically say, create a new Jenkins job, and you say, we know where the artifacts are. We're going to take cross-cloud, which works standalone, and we're going to provision a Kubernetes cluster. Maybe you only want one on AWS or wherever, maybe on-premise. And then you could take your Kubernetes builds that maybe have specific CNI plugins or whatever, and use cross-cloud to deploy that. And then you could take another part of this project to deploy your app using Helm charts or maybe the packaging code. And so we're trying to make them composable, but if you wanted the whole thing, it is definitely, it's implemented. What you see at the CNCF CI dashboard is implemented and running those pieces on GitLab. We've been looking at other projects for a while that could have runners essentially for doing things versus you could have it all integrated, and there's other projects that do everything. They'll start it up and handle all that. But yeah, that's what it is right now.
Thanks.
Let's say we have worked and we have done some work to make that run on Jenkins, let's say. Let's say we also work to have that run on premises rather than on cloud. Is there a way to contribute upstream the work we did? Is that something interesting for you or not at all?
It would definitely be interesting, and I would be interested. If you have an enhancement request like that, please put it in GitHub, or ideas even. So the on-premises to me sounds more like what OpenStack was. So that was an example of potentially a private cloud. It happens to use a provider that has a pretty vanilla OpenStack. But if you had something you're targeting, great. If you're saying we want to extend cross-cloud to do something else, that's great too. So on the VMware side, we've had some pull requests to add more enhancements to what cross-cloud does. We also helped on another project. We've talked about some called the CNF project, so Cloud Native Network Function, and we extended cross-cloud to support other host architectures. It was CoreOS originally, and now we have Ubuntu as another target. So anything along those lines would be great and appreciated.
And what about the structure to host that contribution?
Yeah, like instead of GitLab doing something else?
I'm not sure. Well, where could we put the stuff we just wrote?
Oh, okay. Well, so on the specific enhancements to cross-cloud were usually forks and then pull request back.
Okay.
So if it's that simple, if it's something larger and maybe you're doing a spike on a totally new idea using pieces, then that sounds maybe more like we come back and have some conversation. Okay. Join the CI Working Group and talk about here's a different path.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. How are we on time? 3 minutes? Any other questions? Oh, we're past time. Okay, well. Thank you.